All right, our parsha this week is Balak. It's usually combined um, Balak and Pinchas together, or Chukas and Balak together. But in any case, now it's separate. It happens when we lose a Shabbat reading because of Yom Tov, and so the calendar is adjusted. But now it's a separate parsha in and of itself, which is good because there's a lot to talk about on this parsha without combining it with something else. There are a couple big context or background questions that we have to ask before we get to the actual story. The whole one has to do with the context of this story, the whole idea of God's relationship to Bilam and Balak. And number two is the story itself, both the big story, that is the interaction between God and Bilam and Balak, and the internal story, which is probably the only intended humorous story in the Chumash of Bilam and his donkey. So we're going to look at all of that and see if we can understand the purposes of all of that. So here are the two big background questions. First, this is a question that commentators have asked. Barbanel, I think, was the first one to ask it, and the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Lutzato, also asked the same question. Why does God bother with this whole Bilam Balak story in the first place? Why not just ignore the whole episode? Remember, the Bnei Israel, as we'll see, are unaware of all of this. Moshe most likely is also unaware of all of this. So what's the whole purpose of this story? Okay, so here the question is, okay, so we have this story, but why does God bother with it? Why does God intervene with the Bilam Balak episodes? Why not just leave it as it is? Let Balak hire Bilam. Let Bilam stand on his mountaintops, offer his offerings, pronounce his curses, and then nothing happens. In other words, there's no war. You follow my question? Or not my question, their question. In other words, why does God care if Bilam curses the Bnei Israel when the curses are not going to matter anyway? Let him do what he wants to do and just ignore the whole episode and just go on from there.
It's included because of the blessings.
Well, the blessings can be given separate. In other words, why does he have to force Bilam to give the blessings of the Bnei Israel? Let Moshe give the blessings. Wait till Devarim,
yes.
and let Moshe give the blessings, which he does.
Steve, so we have to assume it's here to teach us something, right?
Right. It has to. Well, there has to be a reason. There has to be a reason.
Right.
It might not necessarily. This big question. The story is here to teach us. That's no question about that. But this question of why does God bother with this whole thing?
Isn't Steve?
Yeah.
Isn't it to show the rest of the nations that God gave them a prophet that was not nearly as good as Moshe?
Yes, that's going to be what we're going to say next. But this is a separate question. In other words, the question here is why does God bother to not allow Bilam to curse the Bnei Israel? Why not just let him curse and let him be unsuccessful? In other words, it not work. And then he goes home in embarrassment and defeat, like he does at the end of the story anyway. But why does God have to intervene? So the one answer that I heard that makes sense, again, given the context, the big picture, which answers this question of why God bothers with this at all, with Bilam at all, is you remember that in the sin of the ego, when Moshe makes his appeal to God not to destroy the people, one of his major arguments is, what are the Goyim going to say? What are the Mitrim going to say? If you destroy these people, they're going to say, God, you took these people out to destroy them in the desert. It's like a Chilul Hashem. And God responds to that because, remember, the whole purpose of the Jewish people is Kiddush Hashem, is to make God sanctified so that people listen to what he's teaching in the Torah. That's our purpose. It's the mission from Abraham's time. So if God destroys his own people, then he's destroying his own purpose. Then the second biggest sin of the Bnei Israel is the scouts. And God again says he's going to destroy the people. He's going to put Moshe, he's going to start all over again with Moshe. And then Moshe uses the same argument. He says, what are the Goyim going to say if you destroy your people here? And that works again. So the whole concept, the place to look is there a relationship between Kiddush Hashem and Chilul Hashem in this whole story of Bilam and Balak? So now let's take a little historical step backward.
Steve?
Yeah?
I'm sorry, I just want to ask you a question. Doesn't this also highlight the power of free choice, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's telling him, no, no, no.
Yeah.
And actually, Ron uses the example from our Polygamy about a child who, a parent says, no, 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 child keeps persisting.
Right.
And finally, parent says, okay, go ahead. And,
Right.
Same idea here.
That's going to come up, and that's what really happens in the text. God says, no, no, and Bilam says, oh, well, wait a second, and then God finally says, okay, go do it. Okay, so that's going to come up later, but that's the episode itself. This is the bigger general question of why does God bother with this whole Bilam Balak episode? Why doesn't just Bilam do what he thinks he's going to do and ignore it? Okay, so now if we back up historically, the Bnei Israel are coming out of the Midbar down around Eilat. Remember, this is the past couple parshas. They start going north on the other side of the Jordan, right? They haven't crossed the Jordan yet. They haven't crossed into Canaan. They're on the other side, and they're making their way up north. So the first kingdom they pass is the kingdom of Edom, right? Edom is the most south, right adjacent to Eilat now. And what happens in Edom? You remember what the Torah describes? What happened between the Bnei Israel and Edom?
Nothing.
Right? Well, what happened is that they sent messengers to Edom, and they said, don't worry, we're going to just pass through, and if we use any of your water, we'll pay for it. If we use any of your food in the farms, we'll pay for it. Just let us pass through. We don't want to make war. We don't want to give you trouble. We just want to pass through. Okay, and Edom doesn't really agree, and so the Bnei Israel have to go a roundabout. Then they come to Ammon, and they give the same thing. They said, let us pass through. We will pay for anything that we use. And they say, no, you can't. And then they attack. And we attack back, and we conquer Ammon because of a defensive war. Okay, and now they're coming to Moab. So my question is, why didn't they just attack Edom and Ammon in the first place? Why are they asking permission to pass through without any war? There's got to be a reason. And the Torah gives the reason. If you remember the text, if you follow the text of these stories, the Torah says, do not provoke Edom or Ammon because they are your kinsmen. They are from Abraham's family and their territory does not belong to you. You're not given permission to conquer their territory. Because whose territory is Edom? Seir, whose territory does that belong to that God gave them?
Esau.
Esau, correct. He gave Esau Edom or Seir, and that belongs to Esau. And so it's not, the Bnei Israel is not going to conquer it. It doesn't belong to us. Then what about Ammon? Why are they not to be attacked either?
Lot.
Lot, correct. They're also relatives. They're Lot's, the two sons of Lot through his daughters are Ammon and Moab, right? Ammon and Moab, and they're protected. The Bnei Israel are not going to fight Ammon and Moab, but they are going to respond defensively if necessary, and that's what they had to do with Ammon. Okay, but now they're at Moab. Now, what does Balak think? Balak doesn't know any of this, right? He doesn't know about relationships. He doesn't know about what God told the Bnei Israel. So what does Balak think? So we see what Balak thinks. We're introduced to it. Balak says, I'm afraid of these people. They're the ones who came out of Egypt. They're the ones whose God has destroyed the whole Egyptian army. And now they've taken over Ammon, and we're next. And so he's afraid of them. Okay, so he hires Bilam to curse the Bnei Israel so that they can't harm Moab. And what's going to happen if God allows Balak to hire Bilam to curse the Bnei Israel and the Bnei Israel doesn't fight? Right? In other words, Moab is not threatening to fight the Bnei Israel. He's just afraid of the Bnei Israel. He wants them weakened so they're not going to fight with him. So what happens if he hires Bilam? Bilam curses them and they don't fight with him. What is Balak going to say? Both Balaam and Bilam. They're going to say, we're successful. I did it. I did it. You hired me to curse them. I cursed them. They didn't attack you. And so I'm good. Thanks for all the money. I'm going home. And Balak says, thanks to our gods who have protected us. And then what's the result? The result is a chilul Hashem. The result is that everybody is going to believe that Bilam has the power to overcome the God of Israel because he just did it. You follow the problem? The dilemma is that he doesn't know that the Bnei Israel can't attack Moab. So he's going to attribute his success at preventing an attack to Bilam's curse. And that is a chilul Hashem because it's going to show that Bilam has the power over the God of Israel. Therefore, God could not let him curse the Bnei Israel. God has to intervene in this whole story and stop Bilam from cursing the Bnei Israel because they're not, it's going to be completely misunderstood.
Steve?
Yeah.
Question, does Rav Hirsch address why the request is for a curse? Why not the request be, bless our nation, make us stronger?
Right, that's a very good question. That's a question a modern commentator asks. In other words, why doesn't he say to Bilam, I'll pay you all this money and bless us and give us victory? And it seems that an answer that was given there well before there's any wars that we've experienced in the past couple of years is that our enemies are more interested in destroying us than blessing their own people, which is the opposite of what we would do. We want to bless our own people and fight only when we have to fight defensively. They want to ignore their own people and just be obsessed with destroying the Bnei Israel, which is what Iran has done. It's used billions of dollars to ignore their own people, where there could have been a productive society. Hamas has ignored it. They're allowing their people to die more and more and more every day because who cares about the people? Their hate of Israel is so strong that they'll do anything to destroy Israel. And they're not interested in blessing their own people. So it's a very interesting observation of even before this whole thing has happened in history. That was in a commentary. It's actually in the JPS commentary on the Parsha. Okay, so does everybody understand the answer to this question? Why does God bother with Bilam and not allowing him to curse and intervene in this whole thing? Because if he allowed it, people would misunderstand that since Bnei Israel will not or cannot fight Moab directly, they would think it's because Bilam is successful in overcoming and controlling the God of Israel. And God could not allow that. Okay, so now let's go to the question of the story itself, which is very odd too. The Gemara comments a lot on this. Neither Moshe or the Bnei Israel are aware of this entire story. And that's kind of strange, but in other words, they don't know this happened. And Moshe later on is obviously told by God to write this story, or he has a nevuah of what happened in detail and writes a story by nevuah. However it happens, it's contained within the Chumash. Okay, but it's contained within the Chumash. It's the only story in which neither Moshe or the Bnei Israel had anything to do with it. It's only about Bilam and Balak and God. Okay, so it must be that, as you've mentioned, that there is some didactic purpose. It's that this whole story has got to teach us it's to teach the Bnei Israel now something before they go into Canaan, and B, they're to teach us as descendants millennia later something about the teachings of the story. So we got to look at it from both parts. What the message is to the Bnei Israel and what the message is eternally to all of us. Okay, and the Gemara makes a strange midrashic comment, which seems to give us a clue as to how to look at the story. This is in the Gemara Bava Batra. It says Moshe wrote his own book. His own book is the book of Devarim, which people all agree that Moshe wrote the book of Devarim. It's not that God dictated it to him. Number two, it says Moshe also wrote the chapter of Balak. That's this parsha. And the third thing it says, and Moshe also wrote the book of Job, the book of Iyov. Now this gives us the hint that this is all midrash. In other words, it's not talking about really history, because Moshe couldn't have written the book of Job. But a midrash is not to be literal. The midrash is to say, I'm trying to tell you something, I'm trying to teach you something, so take a look at this and try to decode what I'm trying to say. So first of all, is trying to say is Moshe wrote the chapter of Balak, meaning the chapter of Balak is going to be relevant to Moshe and his own book. In other words, what Moshe is going to tell the Bnei Israel in the book of Devarim, the chapter of Balak is directly related to that. And so that's very important. The question is, what's the relationship of the book of Job to this chapter of Bilam and Balak? Okay. Now, what's the common denominator between Bilam and Job? Not the book, the people. Bilam himself and Job himself. What's the common denominator? Both of them were not Jewish. Job is not Jewish, and Bilam obviously is not Jewish. Okay, so here are two non-Jews, but both of them have identified themselves as followers of the Israelite God, of the God of the Israelites, of God. Right? Bilam says that. Bilam calls God, the Israelite God, his God. And Job, the whole interaction of Job and God from the very beginning, is Job is a follower, even though he's not Jewish, he's a follower of the Israelite God, and he does everything that he's supposed to do as a non-Jew in relation to, like the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. In other words, in relation to what the teachings of God are to the non-Jews. And he's a righteous person. He's fully righteous. He does everything he's supposed to do. He gives shlamim, he gives the offerings that non-Jews can give. He cares for poor people, he cares for his family. He does all of these things. And of course, in the middle of the story, he never loses faith. He never loses faith towards the God of Israel, even going through all this suffering and all these questioning and everything else. But that's the nature of the book, but that's not the point. The point is, here are two non-Jews who are going to be shown to handle their relationship to the God of Israel in two entirely different ways. Job relates to the God of Israel with complete faith. And Balak is going to relate, Bilam is going to relate to the God of the Jews as pagans relate to their gods. In other words, to Bilam, the God of Israel is just one of his gods. And he's going to relate to it as a pagan prophet does. While Job is an honest, spiritual person who has come to the understanding that God is the creator of the universe and he wants to serve the creator of the universe, which he does flawlessly with full faith, regardless of all of the challenges that God gives him. Okay. If this is attributed to Moshe, if the story of Balak is attributed to Moshe, it's to teach the Israelites an important message, just like the book of Devarim and the book of Job teaches. And what is the lesson of these teachings? This is what it is that we're going to analyze now. Okay, so let's look at the story, and we're going to take it section by section, and as we're wont to do, stick to the text and analyze what the text is talking to, how the text talks to us, and what it wants us to see. So the first, and it's going to give all kinds of literary allusions that are knowable to the Bnei Israel, but also knowable to us because we've read the history in the book of Shemot. So it starts out with Balak ben Zippor saw that all had Israel done to the Amorites, and Moab was terrified because there were so many people. There's just too many. There's 1.5 million of the Bnei Israel camped adjacent to his territory. And he says, indeed, the Moab was filled with dread. The Hebrew is vaikatz, filled with dread. Where did we have the word vaikatz before? It's a literary association that the reader is supposed to be reminded of. Remember the Bnei Israel and Pharaoh. The beginning of the story with Pharaoh is Pharaoh sees that the Bnei Israel have now become strong, and he is filled with dread. The Egyptians became filled with dread. Vayikotsu at Bnei Israel, the same word. In other words, they felt threatened because of the amount of people and the fact that they were spread all over, and the Egyptians came to dread the Bnei Israel. And so dread is a feeling of being overwhelmed by an unstoppable force. And that's the Torah uses that particular verb in order to color Balak's fear. He has a fear just like Pharaoh had the fear of the Bnei Israel. So Moab said to the elders of Midian. Now Midian and Moab are together on this. It could, the commentators are unsure whether why Midian is absorbed within Moab. It could be that Midian and Moab had a battle, and Moab conquered Midian, and Midian now becomes like a vassal state of Moab. In any case, they're both together. They're adjacent to each other, and they're both together. So Moab talked to the elders of Midian, and he said, this horde, talking about the Bnei Israel, is going to lick up everything around it. It's going to, just like an ox licks up grass in the field, they're going to come and completely wipe out everything that we have. So Balak, who was king of Moab, sent messengers to someone Bilam, who was at Petor near Ha-Naharayim, the Euphrates rivers, where the two rivers of the Euphrates come together, in his native land. And Balak said, the people has come out of Egypt, and they cover the face of the land and have settled next to me. Where did we have the expression in Hebrew of cover the face of the land previously? Again, we look to where?
The Makos.
plagues.
The plagues.
Yeah.
The plagues. The locusts cover the face of the land. Remember what Balak
Right.
said. They're going to lick up the land just like an ox licks up the grass. And here it's just like the locusts completely cover the land and they eat everything off. Right? So in Shemot, the plague is, I'll bring locusts into your country. They'll cover the face of the land, which is the expression, which means they'll make us look, Balak says they're going to make us look helpless with the swarm of people over the land that we can't do anything about. Okay. Now, the other hint is there's another story being referred to besides the Mitzrayim story. And that is where Bilam comes from. He comes from Aram Naharaim. And we have a reference to that too. When Yaakov, Yitzchak, sends his servant to find a wife for Yitzchak, he goes to his own family in the town of Nahor in Aram Naharaim. In other words, Bilam is presented as coming from the same place as Abraham. So Abraham and Bilam are going to be another contrast that's going to come out in this story. Now come and put a curse on these people because they're too powerful for me. Perhaps then I'll be able to defeat them and drive them out of the country. In other words, Moab wants to defeat them and therefore they have to be cursed. And then he says a phrase that we know about. For I know that those you bless are blessed and those who you curse are cursed. Where do we know that one from? That's God to Abraham. God's first statement to Abraham is, you will be a blessing to all the peoples of the earth. Those who bless you will be blessed. Those who curse you will be cursed. It's another reference to Abraham. Why is the Torah wanting to associate Bilam and Abraham. Remember, all of this is going to be teaching us contrast, is teaching us differences. What's the difference between Bilam and Abraham?
Total opposites.
They're opposite. But in which way are they opposite?
Abraham was
what
welcoming
did Abraham
good to
do?
everybody, and Bilam doesn't want anybody to come into his land.
What did Abraham do when God spoke to him the first time and told him what to do? Did he hesitate? Did he
No,
question? No, he went.
is it?
He went. In other words, Abraham listens to God immediately with no question and no hesitation. Bilam is going to be presented to us as listening to the same God, but not following through and not hesitating and not doing what it is that God wants you to do. So it's again what it's telling us in this introduction is we have to read this whole story as a contrast of the pagan prophets versus those who are the prophets of Israel. Whether it's a prophet like Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, whether it's a prophet like Moshe, whether it's a prophet like Yeshaya and Yirmiyahu and all our Nevi'im, all of our prophets are to be on one side, and all of the pagan prophets have an entirely different relationship with their gods. And the story is to show the distinction between the two. So having that in mind, we read the story and look for distinctions. So the elders of Moab and Midian left, taking with them a fee to give to Bilam to come and curse. They spend the night. So Bilam says, spend the night here, and I'll bring you back an answer that God gives me. Okay, so he has, now Bilam is in the role of a prophet of the God of Israel. He has taken on that. Now, if it was some other country and some other issue and Israel was not involved, he would be probably a prophet of another pagan god, whoever is related to who he has to curse or bless. But here, since it's Israel that we're talking about, the Bnei Israel, then his God, at least for the moment, is the God of Israel. So he says, I will bring you back an answer that God gives me. So they stayed with him overnight. So God comes to Bilam in a dream, and he says, who are these men with you? A rhetorical question. And Bilam says to God, the truth. Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. A people has come out of Egypt, covers the face of the land. Come and put a curse on them for me. Perhaps then I'll be able to fight them and drive them away. But God says to Bilam, do not go with them. You may not put on a curse on these people because they are blessed. Okay? Now, Bilam's own reputation is based on those who I bless are blessed and those who I curse are cursed. And God says, no, you can't curse these people because they are blessed. Okay, now watch what happens next. Next morning, Bilam gets up, says to Balak's princes, go back to your own country, for God has refused to let me go with you. Well, what did he leave out? He left out the reason. He didn't say, God has refused to let me go because I can't curse them. He can't say that because he's going to lose his job. So he just says, God has refused to let me go. So the princes return to Balak and says, Bilam refused to come with us. That's all. And he leaves off, the princes leave off, and his God, who is the same God of Israel, refused to let him go. The princes didn't even give the right message to Balak. Okay, so as far as Balak is concerned, nothing has changed. Bilam is not coming because he probably just wants more money. So Balak sent other princes, more numerous, more distinguished than the first. They came to Bilam and they said, this is what Balak says. Don't let anything keep you from coming, because I'll reward you handsomely. and do whatever you say. Come and put a curse on these people. And Balaam answered the second group, and he said, even if Balak gave me his palace filled with silver and gold, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of God, my God. Then he adds, now stay here tonight, as the other did, and I will find out what else God will tell me. Okay, so what is he doing here? What should he have said?
Told them what was happening and just told them to get lost.
Right, tell him, sorry, I can't take the deal, so go back and say, I'm not coming. Okay, but he doesn't say that. He says, oh, wait a minute, hold on. Stay here tonight, and maybe God's going to tell me something else. Now, that's going to be one of the contrasts between a pagan prophet and a prophet of Israel. As we'll see, in pagan prophecy, gods are arbitrary. They change their mind, from one day to the other. They respond to bribery, they respond to sacrifices, they respond to incantations. In other words, he's treating the God of Israel as if he's one of the many pagan gods. Okay, and he's waiting, maybe God's going to tell me something tonight, so don't go yet. Okay, so now night came to Balaam and said, since these men have come to summon you, go with them, but do only what I tell you. Okay, so look at that pasuk. God says to Balaam, look, if these people have come to summon you, and we'll see that term summon you is going to be meaningful, go with them, but know that you can only do or say what I tell you. Now skip the whole story of Balaam and the donkey and go to verse 35. This is verse 20, before the donkey story. Verse 35 is the end of the whole donkey story. And the angel says to Balaam, now go with the men, but speak only what I tell you. So Balaam went to Princess of Balak. In other words, nothing changed. This whole incident of the Balaam and the donkey happened in the middle, and Balaam had no change of consciousness. The same way he said, when God said to him, if you need to go, if you want to go, go, but don't only do what I tell you. And at the end of the whole event, God says through the angel to Balaam, go with the men, but speak only what I tell you. So Balaam went. In other words, the whole story didn't teach him a thing. And we'll see why. So Balaam got up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and went with the princes. That's another phrase. I didn't put it in red, but where did we have the phrase, got up early in the morning and saddled his donkey and went?
Yeah, back to Avraham again.
Abraham again, right. Now, Abraham is doing it because he is unquestionably following God's command. Balaam is doing it because he figures he's going to be able to manipulate God. And that's why the next pasuk makes sense. God was very angry that he went. In other words, he didn't get the message. He didn't get the message. He's not listening. And then the angel stood in the road to oppose him, and Balaam was riding on his donkey, and he had 2 servants with him. And now we have 3 episodes that are a theme. Everything happens in threes. But it's the same theme in each one of these episodes. When the donkey saw the angel of God standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand, she turned off the road into a field. And Balaam's reaction was to hit her with his stick and get her back on the road. Then the angel of God stood in a narrow path between 2 vineyards where you can't go off the road. There's walls on both sides. So when the donkey saw the angel of God, she pressed close to the wall, crushing Balaam's foot, and he beat her again. Then the angel moved on ahead and stood in a narrow place where you couldn't go to the left, to the right, you couldn't do anything. And when the donkey saw the angel of God, she laid down under Balaam. She just sat down. And again, for the 3rd time, Balaam was angry and beat her with his stick. Then God opens the donkey's mouth. And God has the donkey speak. And she says to Balaam, "What have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times?" And Balaam says, "What do you mean? You made a fool of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I'd kill you right now." Very interesting. What would he do to the donkey? He would kill her with a sword. Well, he is somebody who has the power of speech, who could curse. He could kill the donkey by cursing her to death. Okay, but he doesn't. He doesn't even say that. So the donkey says to Balaam, "Am I not your own donkey, which you have always ridden? To this day, have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" And he said, "Balaam, you're a prophet. You're supposed to be somebody who knows things. I'm your own donkey who you've been riding for years. Have I ever done this to you before?" And he says, "No," but that's all. He just says no. He doesn't say, "Oh, so what's going on?" He doesn't say that. Then God opens Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of God standing in the road with his sword drawn. So he bowed down, fell on his face, and the angel said, "Why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I've come here to oppose you because your path is a reckless one before me." In other words, you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. You're not listening to God who had told you. "The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If she had not turned away," said the Malach, "I would have certainly killed you by now. And her I would have let go because she's doing the right thing and you're not." So look at Balaam's answer. Balaam said to the angel of God, "Chatasi, I have sinned." Okay, what would we expect him to say? Chatasi. I have sinned. I have not followed what God had told me in the beginning not to go. That's why this is happening to me. My donkey was right. I expressed gratitude. She saved my life. None of that. All he says was, "I have sinned. I didn't realize you were standing in the road." That's all. It's the only thing. He sinned because he didn't realize. He didn't see the angel. And then he says, "Now, if you are displeased, I will go back." What do you mean, if you are displeased? He's standing, the Malach is standing there with a sword to kill him. And the Malach says, "I would have killed you 3 times. Okay, and now Balaam says, "Well, you know what? If this seems to me, you may be a little displeased with me. So, okay, now I'll go back." And this is where the angel of God says, "You know what? I give up. Go with these men and speak only what I tell you." So they went. In other words, Balaam is completely unconscious. He doesn't understand what's going on. He's not curious. He is not this concept of a thoughtful prophet who is on a high spiritual level and can see things and can know things and can understand things. He is basically as dumb or dumber than his donkey. That's why this is considered a humorous paragraph. It's making a fool of Balaam, as he has said. The only thing he realizes, "You have made a fool of me." Okay, so now let's take a look at the associations here. First of all, the association with Egyptian slavery, Vayikatz, and cover the earth with like the locusts did. Why the association? Because it was the God of the Bnei Israel versus the pagan god of Pharaoh and his magicians. I mean, just like it is now. It's the God of Israel versus the pagan gods that Balaam believes in. Association with Abraham. Abraham says, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse you." And Balak says, "For I know whoever you bless is blessed, and who you curse is cursed." Again, the contrast between Abraham, as we pointed out, who follows God explicitly without hesitation, versus the pagan prophet Balaam, who keeps pushing it off and keeps not following and finding excuses and waiting of a chance to manipulate this God of Israel to do what he wants him to do. And the association with the plagues that we mentioned before. So what is the pagan concept of deity? What's in Balaam's mind? Why is he treating the God of Israel the same way that he's treating the other pagan gods? In other words, he's considering God as one of the pagans. Again, unlike Job. Job is an entirely different, that's the contrast. Number one, the pagan concept of a deity is, first of all, every force of nature has a god that controls it. All right? That's what the pagan gods are. They are forces of nature, and all the forces of nature, like rain and fertility and growth and fires and wars, all of those are powers of nature, and there's a god for every power of nature. And the gods, though, these gods are a group of gods, but they are amoral and arbitrary. In other words, they have no moral position. They don't talk about what you should or shouldn't do as human beings. All they talk about is, we are hungry, you have to feed us, you have to give us food through the burnt offerings, and you have to give us wine through pouring them on the altar. That's your purpose. That's all we're interested in. And they're arbitrary, and there's a hierarchy of power that the gods fight among themselves. The whole pagan story about creation is about the different gods of nature fighting, and which ones win and which ones lose. The gods also can be bribed by gifts, and they can be appeased by gifts. If you want something, you have to give a gift to the gods. If the gods are angry with you because nature's doing something that you don't want, then you have to appease the anger of the gods by giving them more sacrifices. Either way, you have to give a sacrifice, you have to give a gift, you have to give a bribe, and that's the way you relate to these gods. These gods can be manipulated by magical incantations and actions by priests and sorcerers. In other words, there are people, pagan priests, pagan sorcerers, pagan magicians, and Balaam is one of them, who have the power over these gods. Blessing and curse comes unpredictably from these gods, so they have to be manipulated by the sorcerers. In other words, in order for the sorcerer to get a god to bless or curse, they have to manipulate the god. There is inherently no justice or mercy by the gods, and there's no moral issues by these gods. Rather, there is arbitrary behavior, like a despotic king who does what they want to do to satisfy themselves when they want to do it. And all these sorcerers and priests are the ones that feel that they have some control over these pagan gods of nature. So what's happening, and the way we have to see Balaam's behavior, is he's treating the God of Israel in exactly the same way. He's treating them according to these rules, that the God of Israel is also arbitrary. The God of Israel also will change his mind. The God of Israel can also be influenced by giving gifts, by giving offerings and sacrifices, and by saying magical incantations. This is what he does. And he believes that the God of Israel is the same as every other pagan god. But God says to Balaam, don't go with them. You must not put a curse on these people because they are blessed. And he gets up the next morning and he says, go back to your country, for God has refused to let me go with you. He left out, as we said, because I can't curse the people. Why did he leave it out? Because he honestly wasn't lying. It wasn't that he was trying to lie. He really believed it. He believed that, well, right now, this God is not going to let me curse them. But he may tomorrow. He may in the future. And I've got to do the right incantations, I've got to do the right sacrifices, and I got to give him the right bribes, and he's going to do it like the other gods. So you know, stay the next morning and see what if anything happens. Okay, so in other words, all of this gives us a hint regarding Balaam treating the God of Israel just like he, as a pagan prophet, he would treat any of the other gods. Now, up to this point, Balaam seems to comply with God's will, but a second group comes and offers more money. And Balaam says, even if Balak gave me his palace filled with silver and gold, I could not do anything great or small to go beyond the command of God, my God. But is it really a command? Is it a command that I have to follow? No, because now stay here tonight as the others did, and I'll find out what else God tells me. In other words, tonight there may be a change of plans. Maybe God is going to tell me to do something different because gods are arbitrary. They change from day to day. You don't have to believe them when they tell you something. So what does it tell us about Balaam's pagan perception? Again, you don't have to believe a God when he tells you because he'll change his mind. Now here's where we get that. Remember that phrase. These men have come to summon you. That phrase also has a particular connotation to it when it appears in the Chumash. And it appears a couple times. Likro lecha. Likro lecha is the Hebrew. And it appears in two significant contexts. Once in Shemot, when Moshe is warning the Bnei Israel, don't make a treaty with those who live in the land of Canaan. You're going to be going to the land of Canaan. Don't make a treaty with them. Don't become assimilated with them. For when they prostitute themselves to their gods and they sacrifice to them, they will summon you, same phrase, v'karalecha, and you will eat their sacrifices. In other words, when a phrase karalecha is used, it means they're going to tempt you. They're going to make you desire something that's not good for you, but they'll make you desire it. Okay, so in other words, it represents, when likro lecha means it calls to you, like you need to go. It's calling to you, like you pass by a pastry, a French pastry with a croissant, and you say the croissant is calling to me. I really want to go in and get one, even though you know it's not good for you necessarily. Okay. And the second one is what's going to follow in Pinchas, the story of the Benot Moab. They say the same thing. When Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with the Moabite women, who summoned them, vatikrena lahem. Right? They tempted them. They summoned them to respond to their gut desires, to the sacrifices of their gods. Okay, so what does it tell us about Balaam wanting to go and to Balak and earn all this money? The Torah, by using the same expression, is saying that Balaam has a taiva. He has this lustful desire to go with them, to make a lot of money and show that he has a power against the God of Israel. He really wants to. And that's why God keeps saying, well, if you really want to go on. It's like, if you really want this croissant, then go eat it. Go give in to your desire. So Balaam got up in the morning, saddled his donkey. God was very angry when he went. Okay, God, again, why was God angry if he told them, go? Okay, he was angry because he didn't tell the reason for God's refusal. In other words, Balaam lied to the servants and he didn't tell them that I'm not going to be successful according to this God at this point, as there's no connection between God's behavior and the moral reasoning behind it. In other words, he doesn't have to tell the truth because God can change his mind at any time, and who knows what the truth is. Pagan gods don't have any truth. Second, because Balaam's motivation was to serve the gods of Balak. not to serve the gods of Israel, which he claims loyalty to. He sees himself controlling the gods, just like he sees himself controlling the God of Israel. Now, the Rambam has an interesting point. The Rambam, in general, and this is a bigger issue, but I'm just bringing this thing here because it's relevant to the Bilam and angel story. Rambam says all the experiences of prophecy and visions of angels, whenever you have a story of a vision of angel, the Rambam takes this very radical opinion that these were dreams, these were visions, and they were not real experiences. They were experienced in a dream and not things that took place in reality, except for the experience of Moshe. When Moshe had a vision or a prophecy, that was real. That was in dialogue with God. But everybody else had a vision, and a vision is like a dream, and a dream means the thing didn't really happen. Now, why this is so radical is because we have a lot of stories of dreams and of seeing angels, and he's saying that they weren't really, they didn't really happen. It was like a vision. It was a dream. When Abraham was sitting at the tent and he saw the three strangers, there weren't really strangers.
So, Steve, is this possibly the superego of the person?
Well, it's more than that. It's a perception. It's a manner of perception. When he's saying, what the Rambam is saying is that when people have visions of angels, all he wants to say is that there are not necessarily angels there. It's that people have visions and dreams, and they treat it as if it's really there. When Abraham saw these three strangers, he responded to it, but it was like a hallucination. It wasn't three real people. It was like he dreamt he was like having a dream state while he was sitting in his tent. And all this conversation between him and the three angels that we read were not real conversations. The only real conversations were between Moshe and the angels, like Moshe and the angel in the bush, and Moshe with God, and all the times there's angels with Moshe. I mean, it's a radical position, and most people don't accept this. But anyway, the reason I'm saying this is because if Bilam's story with the donkey can be seen as you say, Zev, a superego, an unconscious dream state of Bilam. Like Bilam's unconscious, the story was a dream, the donkey story. It wasn't a real story. It was like he went to sleep, he had this dream, and then he woke up, and
I think it was his guilt. His guilt built up so that this is what he ended up.
But his consciousness didn't change. That's what it said in the text. That he was the same before the event and after the event, before the dream and after the dream. Regardless of whether it was real or not real, his psychology didn't change from what it has been and what it still will always be. If so, the story of the donkey is an expression of Bilam's unconscious designed to make him aware of something he's not aware of. That's what a dream is. A dream is supposed to make you aware of something, but you have to pay attention to it. And he, as we saw in the text, paid no attention to it. Right? He didn't pay any attention. He didn't care what it means. He didn't care what it was all about. He didn't care why the angel wanted to kill him. He didn't ask. He didn't ask any of that. So he did not respond to his own possibility of becoming more conscious, more aware of what's going on. He had the dream and sort of ignored the whole thing, ignored any kind of change of consciousness. So then,
I would think that if everybody had bought what the Rambam was saying, you wouldn't have had the whole discussion about the donkey being able to talk and getting that being created before the world.
right, that's the Medrash is saying that God does not do new creations, and anything that looks like a miraculous creation that violates nature was created before creation. In other words, God has created it and just held it in history until it was the proper time. Like the earthquake that swallowed up
Torah.
Iran was the Gemara says was created. That earthquake was created before the creation of the world because it's a violation of nature. Okay, so let's go quickly. Then the angel of God stood in this narrow path between the vineyard. Okay, so we did all of that. He reacts to it. Let me skip all of this. Plus, we said it already. Okay. Okay, so let me look to this summary, seeing this story as a parody. The donkey is the dumb animal. Donkey in Chumash times is just a animal of burden. It's not smart, it's not trained, it just carries things or it carries people. Okay, so a donkey does not, the donkey in this dream image or this real, if it really happened, the donkey does not act arbitrary. In other words, it is consistent. It consistently does what it's supposed to do. It's saving the life of its master. It stands up for loyalty and faithful devotion. It has the power to see the angel of God. It has the power of speech, and the angel supports its claim and protects the donkey. Now look at Balaam. Balaam, who is the so-called prophet, sees the world not as consistent and logical and reasonable, but arbitrary and amoral. There is no loyalty. There's no devotion to his God. He's going to do what he wants to do, no matter what God says. He is a seer, but he can't see the angel. The donkey sees more than he does. He's a sorcerer, and he can't use his power of speech. He has to have a sword if he wants to punish the donkey. The one who can read omens and cannot understand his own dumb animal's behavior is presented as Balaam in this little humorous story. God treats him as the dumb animal and places the words in his mouth as he did to the donkey. As he placed the words in the donkey's mouth, he's going to place the words in Balaam. So he's treating Balaam as a foolish donkey. In other words, it's supposed to make fun of Balaam and Balaam's so-called powers. What's the parallel? The donkey tries to circumvent the angel, and Balaam tries to circumvent God's will. The donkey moves to the edge of the path, and Balaam tries to curse the part of the nation by moving to the edge of the nation. The donkey just gives up and sits down. Balaam gives up and stands still. In other words, Balaam is presented as having the same outcome as the donkey. So what's this whole episode to teach? The Israelites are about to go into the promised land. Their primary challenge is not to fall into pagan worship. That's the whole point. The whole point is to make the pagan sorcerers, the pagan priests, the pagans who are going to entice you to make them look foolish and powerless in relation to the God of Israel. The Bnei Israel have to know that. They have to learn that lesson. And because if they start listening to the pagan priests, they're going to start worshiping the pagan idols and not the God of Israel, which unfortunately is what happens. This is a major theme of Moshe's speeches in Devarim. Do not follow idols. Do not follow the pagan priests. Do not follow anything that they tell you to do. Do not sacrifice to their gods, over and over and over again. And that's what this story is supposed to teach them. There's comparatives. There's also comparisons between non-Jewish prophets and Jewish prophets. Non-Jewish prophets, like Balaam, invokes the deity through ritual. In other words, he puts a sacrifice and then he sacrifices in order to invite God to talk to him and do what he wants. In the Jewish prophets, nobody ever does that. No Jewish prophets initiates contact with God through a sacrifice. God initiates the contact with the reluctant prophet. The prophets really don't want to be prophets, but God has to come to them. The deity serves the prophet's needs. In other words, as far as Balaam is concerned, he wants the God of Israel to serve his needs and to curse the Bnei Israel. And in contrast, Jewish prophets only serve God's needs. They don't serve their own needs. The motivation of professional sorcerers is for money and for profit. Jewish prophets are reluctant in the first place, and they try to refuse their chosenness. They don't get anything for it. What they get is everybody hates them. Source of prophecy, this prophet, Balaam, talks in his own name. He says, this is the prophecy of Balaam, the son of Beor, the prophecy of one whose eye sees clearly, the prophecy of one who hears the words of God, who sees a vision from the Almighty, who falls prostrate and whose eyes are opened. In other words, the words that he's going to speak are in his own name. The prophets never speak in their own name. They always introduce the prophecy by saying, Ko Omar Hashem, or Hashem Omar Elah, or Ko Diber Hashem. So in other words, they always attribute what they're going to say, not to themselves, but to God.
So Steve, maybe one time we could do a class on different perspectives of what consistently through the generation attracts Bnei Israel to the deity. Yeah.
That's a very big question and a very important question. Why did the Bnei Israel always fall for serving pagan gods? Why did they do that all the time? And it's an important question because it's the theme of the end of Yoshua and of Shoftim and of Malachim, all of the kings. All of this have to do with the relationship of pagan worship versus the worship of God. So yes, it's a big question, and we should take a whole time to try to analyze what's the power of idolatry. And it's also in the Aseret HaDibrot as one of the first things is don't make idols, don't worship idols, and yet they can't help it. Okay, so we'll talk about that. Okay, so here very quickly, these are the words of blessing that God puts into Balaam's mouth, and this is what the Bnei Israel can learn about God. So Balaam has to say, how can I curse those who God has not cursed? How can I denounce those who God has not denounced? I see a people who live apart. Am levadav yishkon. A people who live apart. The Bnei Israel are not like everybody else. The Bnei Israel are not like everybody. This is God talking through Balaam. But we need to know that we are not like everybody else. And we do not consider ourselves as one of the other nations. Okay, that's an eternal truth that's important for us.
Steve,
Yeah.
I actually think that I see people live apart and do not consider themselves one of the nations. I think that is the root of anti-Semitism, because we don't integrate.
We don't assimilate. That's
Yeah.
right. We consider ourselves different and we live apart, and they can't stand that. They don't like that, especially because we're successful. And they
And we can't stand it.
Right. Okay. The other truth, God is not human to be capricious, like Balaam thinks. He's not a mortal that he should change his mind. There is no divination against Yaakov. No sorcerer has any power over the Bnei Israel. No evil omens against Israel. You can't curse Israel. None of your gods can curse Israel. The lesson is God is not capricious or arbitrary. Sorcery, divination, magic, omens, all these things that Moshe is going to warn the people against in the book of Devarim, do not work on Israel. Final teaching, when God brought them out of Egypt, they have the strength of a wild ox. They devour hostile nations and break their bones in pieces, and their arrows, they pierce them. And look at this line, like a lion they crouch and lie down, like a lioness, one who dares to arouse them. Anybody recognize in Hebrew that phrase? Kilavi yakum. That was the
Exactly.
middle of this whole war against Iran was taken from this phrase, that Israel is like a lion that has been aroused, that gets up and who devours its enemies. And that's why the army chose, or the government chose, that phrase to label our attacks on Iran. And may those who bless you be blessed, and those who curse you be cursed. And that is what we would expect to happen. That all of those Arab nations, and Hezbollah and Lebanon and Iraq and Syria and Iran and Yemen, all of those are not nations who bless Israel. They curse Israel, and all of them, in Yirtzeh Hashem, are going to be cursed. Okay, we went over time, but there was a lot to talk about.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay.